Alright, I am going to start off describing this project by talking about what inspired it. My mother and I recently got into a TV show called Grimm, and I found it fascinating. A few of the different creatures that are found in there I grew a bond to. First is Blutbad. Now the Blutbad are kind of like the big bad wolf, but I really like the way the sideburns form and the kind of widow's peak there at the top of the head, and I thought they looked really nice and picturesque. Next there's Jagerbar, which is essentially a bear, and the way the teeth formed, how gnashing they look. Then there's the Zauberbeast, which is kind of like a warlock, and the way the skin kind of rots and hangs I wanted to include. Now with those kind of minor details in there, I wanted some more intrinsic, noticeable traits, like the Naiad's gills, or the Connischlong's snake hood. And I'm probably going to pronounce this completely incorrectly, because my German is terrible. The Dickfillig, which is rhinoceros, the way the horn comes out of the nose and they're kind of between the eyes. I also enjoyed the way El Cuegle, also probably pronouncing that incorrectly because my Spanish is also not so good, but I like the concept of his third eye, how with one eye he sees the past, his second eye he sees the present, and that third eye in his forehead he sees the future. Then there is the Daemon Fuhr, which is the dragon, and I like his beard horns, as well as the horned ridges across his cheeks. Also, gonna pronounce this terribly, the Gillumcadius, kind of a crocodile or an alligator. His traits of the teeth exposed on the sides, as well as the scales going down the back of his neck, really seem to characterize that reptilian aspect. I also enjoyed the Alp, though kind of a minor creature, the way it feeds on dreams. The texture of its skin just seemed to radiate with me. How it's both rough and almost sandpapery to the eyes, as well as how the teeth that are not teeth glow. Along with the glowing, my Russian, kind of like my Spanish and my German, I'll just do my best to pronounce the Koshchi, which is kind of like transparent skin showing green veins and everything below the skin, is an interesting aspect. The main antagonist of the whole series, spoiler alert, is the Zerstorer. Now the Zerstorer is this skull-like creature, and I found his appearance fascinating. The way his green eyes shine and how his black skin kind of has that little marble of red. And I wanted that to be one of the main aspects, one of the main characteristics of my creation. Now, these last three are kind of reminiscent of the romantic in me. There is the Ziegvolk, which are essentially satyrs, which attract women. For the Ziegvolk, I liked his horns and his little goat beard. Then there is Cupiditus, and he makes a potion with his saliva that helps people fall in love. For him, I liked where the horns are on his head as opposed to the Ziegvolk. And lastly, with the Musae, which are essentially muses, inspiring people. Though the blue sparkly skin does not appear to continue with the lips, I wanted kind of a blue sparkle on my creation's lips. Alas, with all these different combinations and splicing, I couldn't quite picture the creature in my head. So I drew a very rough sketch just so I could picture it enough to begin my work. Luckily for me, I had a styrofoam head, like one you would put a wig or something on, and I coated that with aluminum foil to help keep my wax or oil-based clay from essentially destroying. Now once I got that aluminum foil and clay kind of mashed on there to get some basic shapes, I began adding in more details, trying to create those primary forms that are necessary to distinguish its characteristics, like the cheekbones and the eye sock ridges, the ears, which I found kind of fascinating to create, as well as the rhinoceros horns, laying out where the eye and teeth are going to be. Then I began adding in the frill and the goat horns. Not wanting to neglect the back, I tediously placed in several scales to represent the alligator's back of the head. Now, as you can see here, there is a almost cap-like ridge. I came to the dilemma of either trying to learn how to put actual hair into the mask or try to simply make the illusion of hair. And since I am still learning and still growing in these skills, I decided to do the illusion of hair, at least for now. Continuing, adding more and more detail, like the beard with the horns, and texturing the skin with pores, and even adding in smaller scales for the frill on the front and on the back. I also trimmed up the scales in the back to make them look just a little bit more realistic. My next step would be to make a plaster of Paris mold of my creation. However, with the horns and the locations that they are, I knew that I had to separate them from my sculpture and make molds of them separately. So starting with the two cranial horns, I lopped them off and began making a mold for them using just some cardboard. I decided to experiment with making a three-piece mold where both horns, one would be on top of the other with a space in between. To keep them from falling too close, I use toothpicks through the cardboard to hold them in place, as well as a system to lower down the wedges and keys to make sure that the thirds of the cast come apart. The finished result worked surprisingly well. As you can see, I used large blue rubber bands to hold the pieces together for the latex casting purposes. Again, I neglected to get a picture of what the horns look like when I remove them from the mold. Of course, I had to do the same with the nose horns and the beard, and I tried to put them all in the same plaster of Paris mold with a 2-half system. Then with the sculpture itself, I used cut up pie tins and tape to make a barrier between the halves, so I could make 1/2 from the plaster of Paris and then remove this barrier and add the second half to make it so that they fit together nice and tight and properly. Once I was able to remove the two halves, I found that the detail was just as exquisite as I wanted it to be, but I did not have enough latex to cast them together as I had hoped. So instead, I poured what latex I had into 1/2 and then painted and dragged up the latex up the sides, making sure it gets into all the details and covers all the edges on both the front and then again on the back. And because it was not a solid piece, I was able to easily pry the latex out and get a nice face. However, though the face turned out quite well, the table in which the plaster edge fell and broke in the process while the latex was still wet, which left it quite mangled and scarred. Alas, I persevered and trimmed and attached the two halves together and proceeded to start painting. First, blocking out solid colors on both the front and the back before adding in the shadows and fades of the detail. I did the horns and beard separate with the same methods of painting before attaching them onto its face. With the painting essentially completed, I masked it off and included some veins or blood vessels to add a secret detail that is only visible when it glows in the dark. I also made it so that the scales in the back of the head will glow. The tape came off relatively easily, leaving the veins barely noticeable. However, after exposure to the sun, or any bright light potentially, they glow quite well, though they look, in my own opinion, a bit more like tattoos rather than the blood vessels that I wanted them to appear. They do add a finesse or pizzazz to my creation. that nocturnal aspect that I wanted to capture from the Aleph. Indeed, it turned out so well that I got a little nervous inside, and I had to prove to myself that I had not just carved it and painted my carving, but actually created a separate entity. And so I took a picture of them both together, the clay and the mask, and it makes my heart glad that I have been able to take these raw materials and make something so amazing and so unique. Thank you for watching. I appreciate the gifts God has given me and the talents that I'm slowly developing and skills I am accumulating. Feel free to comment or like this video to show your support. Thank you.